The cutter tool is one of the most useful tools in Toon Boom Storyboard Pro, and I'm going to demonstrate many of the different uses for it. Let's find it first of all. If you look over at your toolbar, the cutter tool is underneath the select tool, so you just need to click and hold for those different options. So if we go to the cutter view, we're going to demonstrate the use of the cutter tool on two different occasions because it behaves differently on the vector layers than it does on the bitmap layers. So first I'm going to make the bitmap disappear, and we can work exclusively on the vector layers. So I'm actually going to go back and use the selection tool to bring him front and center, and then once again come over to the tool, click down on it until I have the cutter. So once we've zoomed in here, let's just say, for example, that this fellow doesn't have any ears and I want to give him an ear. So you could use the eraser to just make a little room for his ear there. But another way that you can take a chunk out of him is with the cutter tool. It kind of works like a selection tool where you just do a lasso, and then you know it's the cutter tool being used because it's green outlines. And so now you can just cut this by coming up to the scissors and press cut. And by cutting, that allows you to paste it later on if you want to by hitting the paste button or by hitting Command V on a Mac or Control V on Windows. Anyway, so I've done that version of cutting, but here's another really cool way to use the cutter is if you're just drawing and you have intersecting lines, like I draw an ear on him, where those lines have overlapped, where they intersect, I'm able to use the cutter tool to just click on that segment and hit delete and make it disappear. So that's been incredibly helpful to me. That way you don't have to go in with the eraser and just try to carve the lines out just right. It's also frankly very convenient when you have to erase a very large area. Sometimes, especially if you have a fine eraser, I had a really fine eraser and I wanted to erase this nose. I can't just use the selection tool the normal way to delete a portion of the nose. I'd have to delete the whole thing. So I'm really forced to use my eraser, and it can be, especially when you're doing a lot of work, maybe I just don't have the time to go and noodle all that artwork. So let me bring that back by hitting undo, and I'll show you that with the cutter you're able to just really quickly grab large swatches of artwork and cutting them. You can do much bigger areas too and then cut them. And then I'm clicking undo to bring it back. So that is the major uses of the cutter on the vector layers. The cutter tool works on the bitmap layers as well. So for right now I'm going to make the vector layer invisible and click on the bitmap layer so we can work and zoom in. Alright, so using the cutter tool on the bitmap layers, all of a sudden we have different options than we did previously. Most importantly is this choice to have anti-aliasing on when we do our cut, or you could choose have anti-aliasing off. And as you can tell from that little icon, it has a question of whether those jaggy lines are smoothed out in the process. So by default, the anti-aliasing is on, and let's use the cutter, especially on a very soft area, to make a cut in the same way that we did before. You can also pull the cut away in both vector and bitmap layers. You can go ahead and make that selection with the cutter, and you can hit Control X or Command X to make it disappear, but also when you get that cross-haired arrow, you can move that chunk around quite a bit. Anyway, I'm going to zoom in so that we can see what the line quality looks like. And the edges are somewhat soft because it has the anti-aliasing on. And going to demonstrate it with anti-aliasing off so that you can see the difference. Now when I break it off, it's a much harder edge, and if I zoom in, the jaggies become really apparent. So it's a very nice option to be able to use the anti-aliasing, which again you find here under Tool Properties, and then you want to say anti-aliasing on. Switching from the bitmap layer to the vector layer, you can notice that the cutter tool options change. So bitmap, we have these choices, which are whether to select it by a lasso or a marquee. This is grayed out, and we can turn the anti-aliasing on or off. In the bitmap area, the reason that this is grayed out is because this is a vector tool and typically used with the pencil tool. But now when I switch from bitmap to vector, you can take a look and see this lasso and marquee choice is still the same. However, now we have the choice, just like with the pencil tool, whether to have our ends of our cut to be round or flat or beveled. And in the vector layers, the anti-aliasing is not available because it doesn't work that way. The vector cuts will be clean by their very nature because the vector lines are always clean and don't have the jaggies. So let me go in and with the cutter on the vector layer, take a chunk out of this nose and pull it away, and you can see that it is it's a clean cut. There aren't a bunch of jaggies there. All right, let me move that out of the way, and now I will go over to the bitmap and we'll make a similar cut, but with anti-aliasing off. And when I do that, you can see that there are now jagged edges when I didn't use anti-aliasing, where on the vector layer that's smooth edges no matter what, whether because anti-aliasing is not available on the vector layer, but it is a much smoother cut. All right, so I'm going to do some undos, and I do want to point out that you'll notice that I do have a soft shadow on the nose of the vector layer, and that those kind of soft shadows and soft strokes aren't normally associated with the vector layers, but they are available. So those textured lines are available in the vector layers. The point is, though, that they eat up a lot more resources when you do a soft line in the vector layer than when you use it in a bitmap layer, which is more designed to handle those kind of soft textured strokes.